Welcome again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I was just looking back, in case you don't remember, we actually kind of kicked off our town halls with a similar medical town hall, also with Dr. Rafi and a COVID update back on the 2nd of March. And here we now are in June, and how much has changed between now and then and how much hasn't, which is kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. So we are so excited to once again have Dr. Rafi with us. He is made the suspect decision to be an adult infectious disease doc, but is smart enough to work with camps and works with Camp Tecumseh. So he's going to kick off with some talking points, and then we will open up to questions. Dr. Rafi, take it away.
Thanks, Dr. K, and thanks everybody for tuning in again. I'm always surprised and impressed that anybody shows up to hear me talk, so thank you guys. Just a couple of perspectives on sort of where we are with things in the COVID pandemic. Obviously, here in the US, things are so much better than they were the last time we were all together, and that's really great news. I hope and I pray that we're out of the woods with this, but I'm honestly still kind of anxious. And the reason I'm kind of anxious is because it's not true all over the world that things are better. India obviously is still facing sort of unspeakable and horrific levels of disease, as are a number of locations in South America, Brazil and Argentina in particular, and in Mongolia. I think we really don't know what's going on in Africa. But I think we have to really remember that we are a global community here. And, I think Tony Fauci said it really well when he said, we're not safe until everyone all over the world is safe, because all it takes is someone getting on a plane and all of a sudden things are rekindled. And we'll be talking about some of these variants that you're probably hearing are coming out of these sort of ongoing hotspots a little bit later and what we know about them. So this is pretty up to date. As you all know, what's true today isn't true tomorrow, and things are moving so fast. But this is true as of about a week and a half ago, which is when I started putting these slides together. Globally, we've had almost 170 million cases and 3.5 million deaths, and half of the deaths are from the US, Brazil, India, Mexico, and the UK. Here in the US, mostly California, Texas, Florida, and New York, having the majority of cases with over 600,000 deaths. And India and Brazil, it's really just staggering what's going on there. And it's probably underestimating what's really going on in those locations. So this is as of about 2 days ago. What's today? It's the 8th, maybe 5 days ago, June 3rd. You can see, we are continuing to improve in the United States. That's this blue line. Other countries are sort of faded in the background. This is from Johns Hopkins database. So the good news is we're doing something right here, but I just want to remind everyone that it's fragile. Unless we sort of keep going with our trajectory of vaccination, we're likely to sort of backtrack. And I'm concerned that, now that Memorial Day is passed and we are gathering and a lot of states are reopening, I know California, where I am, is basically turning off all restrictions on June 15th. And, I would be lying to you if I said I weren't really anxious about it. Some of that is just me being anxious as a person. And some of it is, I think what we're going to be talking about with some of these variants has the potential to undo a lot of this really, really impressive progress that we've made. This is sort of a little bit of a wonky diagram, but the point that I sort of want everyone to take away from it is if you look all the way over on the right side of this color-coded graph, it's sort of showing the relative contribution across the world of where the infections and the deaths are happening. And, right now it's India that's really dominating the global scene, but, there are all kinds of people who are going to India and coming back to the United States. And you might think, really, aren't we sort of limiting travel But remember that, US citizens who go to places that have restricted travel aren't restricted in their travel when they come back. So, I know of a couple of friends or colleagues of colleagues who have gone to India during this time, some of them unvaccinated, and they've come back. So, what's happening in India is only a plane ride away from what's happening here. So, again, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer doomsday sayer. I'm just trying to really communicate that what we're seeing here is great, but we really need to be careful in our approach going forward. We're at a very, very fragile time. This is sort of what was going on in the US. This is actually outdated. It's almost a month old already. And, in COVID time, that's like dog years. So you can see that, the lighter the color, the less the activity, and, things were starting to improve, particularly in the coastal regions, by the May, and it's even better now. So we are improving a lot. I'll talk to you at the end about specific areas of the country that I'm particularly concerned about and why. And, again, if you sort of look at the county level, you can get a sense of what counties across the country are doing better with controlling the epidemic and where things are still pretty hot. This is already 3 or 4 weeks old, and things are overall a little better, but I think the general pattern of where things are still problematic still generally hold true. And, so this is a picture that might look sort of similar to what we looked at before, but the other one I showed you were infections. This is deaths. And you can see there are still counties and hotspots across the country. And certainly we don't go across straight state lines or between counties with any regularity. And the amount of testing is declining significantly. And so our ability to sort of catch outbreaks and intervene on them really is going down. I think that's something we really need to pay attention to and think about how to sort of not lose track of things, because this is likely going to be with us for some time. This is hospital admissions. And again, it's certainly way, way, way better than it was during that third wave that we had earlier this spring. But you can see there are still regions where you're still having an enormous number of COVID admissions happening. And, this is a little bit scary. This is, about a month old, but you can see, in just about every state, there are still some counties that are having really high levels of COVID-related admissions. So no matter what you think or know to be happening in your state and your region generally, you got to remember that it's not uniform. It's not monolithic here. And, just because one community is doing a good job, it's very fragile. Then it could be next week, moving county to county. So this is why I'm saying I don't think we're quite out of the woods yet. And these are really fragile gains. So why are we doing so well? And I have a colleague in infectious disease at Brigham and Women's in Boston who's super, super smart, and he's a great writer, and he's actually really funny. So I kind of like following him. And, if you ask him what's contributing to this decline, he's really clear that it's not just one thing. It's a combination of things that we're all doing together. There's some seasonality to this, right? I mean, people, when you're indoors more and congregating in close settings, the same with any respiratory virus, you're going to have more transmission. If you're outside more, the weather's nicer, there's going to be less of it. This herd immunity concept, you might say, but we're not at that level of vaccination yet. We shouldn't be hitting herd immunity. But, if you think about the people who have had COVID and so have some level of immunity, and you add in the people who never had COVID and are vaccinated, we may actually sort of be hitting that tipping point, at least in some regions. As I'm going to tell you at the end, there are some areas of the country where I'm really concerned that vaccination rates are super low. And that could be sort of like kindling for an outbreak, a fourth wave that could be starting as soon as, now that Memorial Day has passed and going into this spring and summer. So we'll talk more about that. Behavior, maybe, you like to think people are being better behaved. I don't know. I think it depends on what part of the country you're in. The vaccines, the more we know about them, they're super safe. They work super well. And I think it's kind of remarkable that, 10 months after we, sort of had the first people getting vaccinated, that we've done as well as we have. And I think it's really amazing science. So yay, science. Um, uh, Anytime the virus mutates, and it is mutating, and we need to expect that it's continued to mutate, in order to escape like the immunologic response, often it becomes less fit. So maybe some of these fitness issues are hampering the spread a little bit. That may be a little optimistic, as we're going to talk about with some of these variants, we've actually seen to be spreading more, but it's an interesting hypothesis. And then, some combination of all of that together. So again, not to be a Debbie Downer doomsday sayer, but if you look at the variant strains that are being diagnosed across the US, I think this tells a really important story. And what I'm going to ask you to look at in this chart is the sort of peach colored bars that are labeled B.117. That's the UK variant. That was the first sort of variant that we sort of heard about that was increased transmission and increased hospitalization rates. And if you look since January of this year till May of this year, the proportion of cases of COVID that are from this B.117 lineage has dramatically increased. And that gives you an idea of how one of these transmissible variants can really take over an epidemic and drive an epidemic. And one theory is that it was this B.117 taking over that really drove this third wave. Why is this important? Because there are other variants now that may be even more transmissible that we're seeing. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about with this India variant. This is what makes me concerned, that unless we continue to be careful and work on our vaccination rates, we are really at risk for a fourth wave. This is from the UK and gives you an idea of the same sort of thing happening with this India variant across the United Kingdom. You can see over time, this is a little bit of a slice, it's a pie slice of all their infections. It was the infections that weren't being caused by something else. This was sort of the ones that they were looking at that they couldn't explain. But if you look at the orange bars, you see this B1617.2, which I mean, it's all gobbledygook, but that's what it's called. Actually, it does have a new name now, just because all these silly numbers are getting harder and harder for people to remember unless you're a complete nerd like me. That's now Delta. They have Greek letters. So that B.117 we were talking about, that's Alpha, and there's a Beta and there's a Gamma, and this is Delta. Orange on this chart that's the Delta virus. So if you start hearing Delta variant, and you're going to be hearing more about it, that's what this is. They don't want it to be stigmatizing and say it's the one from India, because we certainly don't want to be calling it the China virus. We don't want to be calling this the India variant, because that stigmatizes populations. It did originate there, but now it's everywhere. So you see that an increased transmissibility is something that we may have to start worrying about here in the US if this starts to take over. That could contribute to a fourth wave. So why do we care about these variants? So some of them, in particular, that B.117 and the B.1351, definitely spread more. They spread faster. And there's a suggestion that there's increased disease severity. They can mess up some of the COVID testing. So that's really important, because we think as we go back to in-person camps, we're doing this PCR testing, we're doing this antigen testing. Well, some of these actually are less detectable by our currently available tests. The tests are running to keep up with these variants, but there's always a lag, and you have an increased risk of missing some of these variants. And in terms of treatment, Some of these have been shown to be less responsive to some of our treatment agents, and in particular, the monoclonal antibody treatments. And there's this question that we all sort of develop hives about whether or not they're going to be able to escape the vaccines. And no one knows the complete answer for all of these. Yes, I have a slide at the end that I'll show you, which is the current state of the understanding of what the vaccines do or don't do against each of these variants. But in a test tube, if you have people who've recovered from some of these, if you've gotten vaccinated with the currently available vaccines, and they take the antibodies from the blood of people who've gotten these vaccines, and they try and neutralize in a test tube these variant strains, sometimes they're as much as 10 to 15-fold less responsive. Now, does that matter for clinical protection? Probably. The question of whether you need boosters to protect you against some of these variants, or what the evolution is going to be over time, is an unanswered question. And we have some of the answer already just from a natural experiment in an area of Brazil where people had one of the early strains, and a lot of the population actually got it, and they all had evidence of immunity to it. And then they all got really sick again from the next strain that came through. So that was sort of a natural happening that makes a lot of us super anxious that immunity, to one of the previous strains doesn't protect you, and certainly doesn't protect you super well against the new strains, which is why the recommendation is, even if you've had COVID, go get a vaccine anyway. So that's what that's about. And I just want to remind people that this has had such a profound global effect on life expectancy that it's shown up. And on the left side of this slide, you can see sort of for the first time, really in recent history, we've had a drop in life expectancy, and it's all attributable to COVID. And it's not equal across all populations. And on the right side of the screen, you can see the changes in life expectancy at birth based on race and ethnicity. And so this isn't an equal opportunity offender in terms of who it's affecting. So we really have to be careful for our more vulnerable populations and the effect that this is having on them. And I think everyone knows this, but this is the data on what happens to mortality across age groups. This isn't a surprise to everyone. Older populations and the super young, and I probably would lump in here likely immune compromised people as well, are going to have increased mortality rates from this virus. And I think the danger is assuming that young people are going to be fine. And they may not have mortality at the rates of older populations, but this virus is a nasty, nasty virus. And we do not, and probably will not know for many years, what the long-term implications are of getting even a mild case of it. It's a vessel or vasculotropic virus. It causes problems we're hearing a lot about these COVID long haulers. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. It does happen in kids. And you don't want this virus if you can avoid it. I think we're going to be learning about its long-term effects for many years to come. So really, what have we learned in the last 6 months? Although for most people, it ends up being a mild or moderate disease, we really don't know what the long-term implications are. We know that in about 15% of people, it can get very severe. That can result in cytokine storm, which is this inflammatory cascade that actually has very little to do with the virus itself, and almost the body just sort of having a volcanic explosion of an immune response late in the disease. We know across all the studies that the risk factors for severe disease are pre-existing heart or lung disease, diabetes, hypertension, chronic lung disease, chronic kidney disease, obesity, smoking or vaping. There's this disproportionate burden of Black and Latino persons. Immune compromise certainly is in there. And that about 40% of the infections are quote unquote asymptomatic. But what's really dangerous is about 40% of the transmission occurs before anybody develops any symptoms. So it's sort of a sinister virus. So there are a lot of things that are under study for treatment of COVID. There's very few drugs that actually have been shown to have an effect. Corticosteroids, believe it or not, like dexamethasone, actually have been shown to reduce mortality, which means death, in people who have pretty severe oxygen requirements. So that's really important. And remdesivir, which is a drug that now has full FDA approval, is something that shortens hospital stays. So that's really important also. What you would use to treat people is different at different stages of the disease. There's early infection, it goes then into the lungs. And then, as I mentioned, it turns into this volcanic sort of inflammatory phase at some point. I don't want to really get into the details here because I think probably many of you, you're not interested at that level of detail. I'm happy to go into any of that detail for people who really are interested and have questions about it. I do want to address a couple of things because we're hearing a lot about patients and campers and people who are at risk coming in asking about vitamin D and should I take vitamin D and everything vitamin D. And every sort of disease known to mankind practically has had this question of whether or not vitamin D makes it better. And there's usually some data that suggests that it does. And then when they actually do a rigorous trial, it kind of turns out that it doesn't. So again, there's a little bit of data that it suggests it might help. And then there are some rigorous ongoing trials to answer that question. There's basically a series of observational studies that suggest that vitamin D might be helpful. There are a couple of other drugs that people are super excited about. One is an antidepressant called fluvoxamine. The other is a drug called ivermectin, which is an antiparasitic drug. It's getting a lot of press. There are trials ongoing of vitamin D and fluvoxamine and a bunch of other drugs that you can actually participate in remotely. So if you think you have somebody near you that you come into contact with and your institution doesn't have access to some clinical trials, you can participate in these entirely remotely. You don't need to go anywhere. They'll mail you test kits and medications and all that. So there are things that you can do even if you are someplace where there isn't a lot of clinical trials. I do want to just briefly mention long COVID. We talked about it. All the symptoms are listed here on the right. The sort of formatting of the slide is a little mucked up. I apologize. I'm not sure why it's showing up a little funny, but the big symptom that almost everybody reports is profound fatigue, and it can be really debilitating and prolonged. And no one fully understands this. There's a lot of studies to try and understand this. It can be multi-organ system. It can really affect people's work life, their social life, their home life. You don't want this virus if you can avoid it. It can really affect just about every aspect of people's lives, their temperature regulation, their heart rate and their heart rhythm, their blood pressure. It can be super, super debilitating. I'm trying to make an argument for avoiding the virus at all costs in case that wasn't clear. So where are we going with vaccinations? You can see on this slide where in the country we're doing better in the darker areas versus worse in the lighter areas with vaccination. And I guess sort of somewhat depressingly, it's sort of the areas where I think the politics has discouraged people from going and getting vaccinated. So we have 3 vaccines that are approved by emergency use authorization. None are fully approved by the FDA yet, but the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines have submitted applications for full FDA approval. On this slide, I have some information about where things are for children and adolescents, since that's sort of our focus area. The Pfizer vaccine now has an EUA for ages 12 and up. I think everybody's aware of that. They were the ones that had gone down to 16 originally. So the expansion just recently was the 12 to 15 age group. And that's super exciting. And that was based on a phase 3 trial in about 2,200 adolescents. Moderna also has an adolescent trial that's now resulted, and it looks really good by press release. I haven't actually seen the data yet. They've reported really high levels of protection for 12 to 18, and they've submitted for an emergency use authorization. Also, they're in the process, as is Pfizer, of going down to 6 months of age. So stay tuned for more information about that. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that has gotten somewhat of a bad rap recently, not only because of decreased overall efficacy, but because of this thrombotic complication that is seen in young, otherwise healthy, more women than men, has sort of soured people on it, even though it's 1 dose versus 2 doses of the other vaccines. And we can talk more about that if people are interested. So a lot of people have said to me, you know, I have teenage kids. Should I vaccinate them? I'm concerned. I'm worried. And again, Paul Sachs, my go-to. Follow him on Twitter if you don't. He's hilarious and super smart. So this is why he supports it. And this was in a tweet he put up that I couldn't have said better myself, so I didn't. He said, they do have a high incidence of disease. There's this rumor out there, kids don't get it. Not true. Not true at all. In fact, if you look at the most recent data, adolescent infection rates and hospitalization rates are actually at an all-time high. That is scary. And it's also underreported. So please don't think adolescents and kids don't get this disease. They do. Only a small fraction get quite sick, but I'm concerned that this rate of kids who are getting hospitalized is increasing. They can spread it to others in their households, other kids. And remember, those households can sometimes have vulnerable populations, and that's really important also. They can do more activities safely if they're vaccinated, things that have been on hold for a year. And there's really no reason to think that a vaccine that is safe in older adolescents isn't going to be less safe in kids. And I think that's really important. And really, these are pandemic times still, and it really is calling for ongoing attention to this stuff. So I hope that makes sense. It's not going to convince everyone. The other thing I hear all over the place is it's going to compromise fertility. There is no data. There are no data that supports that statement. mRNA vaccines do not integrate into somebody's chromosome. It is not biologically plausible that it affects fertility. So, you know, and the other thing is, you know, people say, well, we don't have long-term safety. We don't have long-term safety. The way the immune system works, the way these things function is if you don't see something after a couple of days to a couple of weeks after the vaccination, it's not like something is going to show up 3, 4, 5 years down the line as a cause of that vaccination. That's just not the way the immune system works. I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir, but you know, it's something that I think it's really important that we get the real science out there. So just in the last 2 things I want to tell you is, you know, this is a sassy slide that I'm happy to share with everyone that not only gives you the efficacy against severe disease, but it tells you what the efficacy is against some of these variants. And I actually have a cooler slide that I just want to show you that I found also on Twitter yesterday that sort of summarizes what we know. And, you know, this is the alpha, beta, gamma, delta of the 4 big variants, including where they were first identified, what we know about transmissibility for each of them, what we know about the disease that they cause for each of them, and what we know about the vaccine activity against each of them. And I'll sum it up for you. The mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, do the best against the variants. So I know for a while we were saying, get whatever you can get, and includes J&J. I'm not saying that anymore. I'm saying get an mRNA vaccine. So what could torpedo all of this progress this summer? These are the states where the vaccination rates are below half. And this is what really makes me concerned, because these variants are coming. They're probably here already. We just don't know it because we're behind the 8 ball as we have been throughout the epidemic. And there's probably going to be a 4th wave, and it's probably going to be in these states. And once it gets going in these states, we don't know what it's going to do in other states. So thank you. I'll shut up now. I'm happy to answer any questions. That was probably way more information than you wanted. I'm sorry it was a little bit of a downer, but vaccines work. Get them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rafey. Always amazing information and explained very clearly, which is much appreciated for those of us that have to go and answer some of these questions, which I'm going to open up to the group. Questions, things people want to ask or bring up.
I wanted to ask a question. Dr. Rafey, you had talked about vitamin D. I had also heard that zinc was, if you don't have zinc in your body, maybe, people that are diagnosed with that need zinc. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, great question. That came up a lot very early in the epidemic because in the use of hydroxychloroquine, people, when there were negative studies for hydroxychloroquine, said, oh, that's because you didn't give zinc with it. You need zinc. And there's all this sort of observational, non-rigorous data that suggests that there's an additional additive benefit of zinc. What has been true in every respiratory virus situation is these observational studies suggest that there might be a benefit of zinc. And it's often at levels that would be toxic if you actually took them in your body. So basically, if you took so much zinc that you gave yourself uncontrollable diarrhea and had other side effects or toxicities from zinc, there might be a biologic effect, but at the levels at which it's being supplemented, it's pretty clear it doesn't do anything except give you the runs.
Thank you.
Now, I am a big proponent of the placebo effect. My husband is always telling me when I get a cold, I run out and I go buy Airborne. And he says to me, but you tell me that stuff doesn't work. True, but it has a very strong placebo effect. And so I take it. And it usually gives me the runs. But anyway.
You actually led into what I was just going to ask. Is there any supplement or anything else that does make any difference? I often have families that ask me about that.
Yeah, not that we've identified to date. I mean, I think the best recommendation is eat a healthy, balanced diet. Make sure that you're not going to be nutritionally deficient in a way that's going to impair your immune responses. But we've not identified any supplement or homeopathic remedy that's been studied that's going to help.
So I'm curious for a question to the group. How many of you will be doing camps or be doing in-person gatherings, and what kind of questions have you been dealing with because of that? I see some thumbs down. How about other folks? Anyone that's on the call that will be doing an event?
Yep.
Okay. We are doing an event here as well. We're normally a week-long camp, but we are doing just sort of an evening and a next day event. I am terrified, but I was overruled, so we're gonna give it a shot. I see a couple other thumbs up from some folks.
Well, the Children's Cancer Network in Phoenix, Arizona, not Southern Arizona, they gave the families an option of doing virtual camp or in-person day camp for younger children. And I think it's from like 10 to 4 every day for a week. And every single parent, 29 families responded, and all 29 said, you're taking my kids daily physically. So we'll see what happens.
Looks like we've still got some virtual camps. Maybe in the fall, they may reassess some of that for a couple of camps. Okay. How about other folks?
Yeah, we have actually decided we're doing nothing in person. Our first in-person plan thing is for October, pending no fourth waves coming, and pending that vaccination things have updated and it has really picked up. And we did a town hall with our parents groups just to kind of answer some of their questions. And I was really pleased, at least for the people who signed on. Now, again, you can say it's a bias because the people that signed on were the ones that want to know what's going on and believe there's a problem. But we had a strong response from people saying, my kid is going to be as first in line as I can get them to get the vaccine when it's available to them. So that was a very positive feeling for us. But yeah, we were not doing anything in person.
Well, we're doing our weekend camp in September, the middle of September, and this is in Pima County, Southern Arizona. And the camp filled up in 24 hours. But we will be doing a different version of camp, but yeah.
Our camp is in August, and we've decided that we're full virtual as well. But I also volunteer at another camp at the end of July. They are doing mostly virtual. They're doing 1 3-hour block of time in the week that they'll be doing an in-person event. And that's it for the entire week. There's, they're doing requirements for any staff that are attending. They have to be vaccinated. They have to show proof of vaccination. They also have to have a COVID test 48 to 72 hours prior to the event, and that kind of stuff. And then obviously they're still doing mask requirements, even though it is still outside. They're going to do mask requirements, but everything else is virtual.
We're in Hawaii and we're doing a full week, the last week in July, in person. We're also in a state that has a very high vaccination rate. Yeah.
Diane, did you say you're in Hawaii?
Yes.
I'm just going to write that down.
I see a volunteer in your future, Diane.
Let's be honest, we've all said it. We've always wanted to find a camp in Hawaii. So now I'm just going to.
Yep. Volunteering for Gold Ribbon Review.
All right. How about other folks? Okay. Those of you that have thought about this, whether your camp is coming up soon or in the fall, have you talked about now that there's going to be vaccines available for the majority of our campers? Will you require it? Will you recommend it? Thoughts that you've brought up yet for that age group?
We have a high number of teens that have already signed up for it. We are strongly encouraging vaccination, and we're doing a lot of COVID testing, and we're meeting with the parents, I think, next week to let them express their concerns.
Unless I missed something earlier in the discussion, have we talked about the vaccines and any studies being done on children that are cancer survivors or anything, the effects in, oncology kids and the vaccines?
Yeah.
Dr. Rafey addressed that because we already talked about that a little bit before we started. So
Yeah, there are studies ongoing. We just don't have the results yet. There's some preliminary data that particularly hematopoietic bone marrow transplants and liquid tumor kids, so leukemia, lymphomas, don't respond as well. So the question isn't one so much of safety as does it do anything, and we don't know the answer to that question yet. So I think it's a little bit of an unknown what to do with kids who are in treatment or recently out of treatment or in those specific kinds of cancer situations. But my approach would be, for kids who are not a liquid malignancy situation or are no longer in treatment, I would recommend it. Alan Homans, I know you are thinking about this all day, every day. I don't know if you have additional thoughts about that also.
No, not really. I agree with what you're saying.
So I was with a group a couple of weeks ago that are doing in person, and they're not requiring all their families to get immunized to come to the family camp. And I had asked my families if they're going to be immunized by the date of camp. And of about 35 families, So about 7 of them are not planning to get immunized. So I was trying to decide what to do with these families, either to
Wow.
tell them there's no space left or rent some cabins like 10 miles down the road, but they'd be really luxurious cabins. And I'm like, I don't want to reward them for not being vaccinated. So, you know, I've got the power, to be honest. Nobody knows that, but of course I do. But anyway, I'm just trying to decide. And as a New Zealander, you know, I could just make everyone quarantine for 2 weeks before coming to Canada. Anyway, there's a lot of questions and I don't know what it's going to look like in September, but you know, my hand's on the button. Like I can push whatever button I like to put people wherever I like. But it's kind of a, you know, there's some moral ethical questions there about how I'm doing it. Just don't tell anybody else.
You know that we said this was recorded when you signed in, right, Beverly? Just
You know, in New Zealand, you're not allowed to sue anybody. So I just go by that philosophy. I don't care where I'm living.
It's just like that here in the US.
I know, I figured. No one sued me yet, which is surprising.
You know, we at Tecumseh, we've sort of had these conversations about, you know, what you can and can't require. And, you know, we're, I don't know if Dennis is on and wants to talk about the conversations that we've had, but, you know, we're talking about the first potential in-person activity being our dad's weekend this fall, because you can require all of those adults to be vaccinated in order to come on the property. And I kind of applaud that approach. I'll just leave it there.
Mm. Where's that guy from New Jersey? He's not here. New Jersey and
I'm
Michigan
here.
are having camp. Oh, you are there. Where are you?
Here.
Oh, there you are, Ryan. Yeah. I was in Manhattan this last week. It's just a wild place. It's like Arizona.
It's weird. Everything's half and half now. You go to one store, everybody wears masks. You go to the store next door, nobody's wearing masks. It's very confusing. But yeah, I was actually in the background working on staff training. We have staff training coming up in 10 days, and then our summer camp starts July 3rd through August 5th.
So Ryan, if you wouldn't mind, what have you decided as far as vaccine requirements for staff or campers or both?
All of our staff, all of our counselors, all of our volunteers, all of our medical staff are vaccinated, except one girl who, because of her intensive cancer treatment, she doesn't react to a vaccine, so she's the only one. We're only encouraged it, and I think probably 80% of all of our eligible kids have the vaccine. And for our family camp, we strongly encouraged it again, but the way our schedule is broken out and with our limited capacity, they're going to stay in their family cohorts doing everything anyway. So they're, I mean, everybody's getting a PCR test before they arrive. Everybody's getting a rapid test as they arrive. And then everybody's getting a PCR test on day 4.
Other questions, comments that people have?
Now, I have a question. Rafi, you mentioned that some of the variants are particularly good at evading testing. And is that the B117, the new one that's, how effective the current testing, just taking where it is right now, how effective or ineffective is it in terms of having accurate results?
Yeah, Don, I'm gonna need to get back to you on that because I don't know the analytic details. Let me, if it's okay with you, let me talk to my our testing guru at our location that gave me that information, and let me get back to you on that. I don't want to give you misinformation. My sense is it's the PCR tests are dancing as fast as they can to catch up and catch the variants. It's the antigen tests that are the most liable But I'll get back to you with sort of percentage reductions in sensitivity.
That'd be terrific. Thank you very much.
Rafi, quick question for you. You're talking about they're now starting to do studies in terms of, immunocompromised children. Have you noticed or found anything in terms of children who have like severe special needs, if they're finding that the virus or the vaccines are having any effect or adverse effect? Or?
Not that I'm aware of. The two special cases that there is a concern are kids with Down syndrome and kids with sickle cell disease. And the sickle cell disease, I think it's easier to understand because there's pre-existing scarring and vasculopathy and lung and heart challenges in a lot of those kids. The Down syndrome, to be honest, was a little bit of a surprise to me, but apparently that's fallen out in a number of the studies, and it has something to do with the developmental issues, but there's also biology.
Thank you, bro.
All right, well, we are a little bit past our 45-minute time frame. Does anyone have one last question to wrap things up?
Can I
I
call
don't
you
have a
in
question.
August?
Go ahead, Tammy.
I don't have a question, but Rafi, I just wanted to say, please don't think of it as being a Debbie Downer, because, I'm right there with you. I'm one of those people. I've been working in the vaccine clinic and answering a lot of these questions too, and trying to constantly remind my friends and family who so desperately want to go back to life as normal, and they get inconsistent messaging sometimes from, unfortunately, I work at NIH, and so I hate to say the CDC sometimes, gives some inconsistent messaging or stuff that is misinterpreted. And it makes it really hard to be the person saying, look, we're not out of this yet. We're not even close to being out of it yet. It's a world society where it's not just us in the US. So I appreciate very much. I thought you gave an incredibly comprehensive and very clear, understandable presentation that was fact-based, and I appreciated that. So please don't think of it as being Debbie Downer. I'm right there with you.
Well said, Tammy. Completely agree.